Welcome back to another developer deep dive. If you want to get to know the team behind the video game Beyond Good and Evil 2, you won't want to miss this, because we will be looking at the history of the creator of the original Beyond Good and Evil, Michel Ancel. We know that he is the senior producer for the next installment in the series, but what other games has he worked on? Hello fellow Space Monkeys, this is the Mildly Morose Man, otherwise known as Dan or Dan the Man, whichever you fancy. I am here to bring you another thought-provoking video on the developers of Beyond Good and Evil 2. Be sure to subscribe if you want to stay up to date on all things Beyond Good and Evil 2. Michel Ancel has the longest game development history of the developers that we have looked at so far. He was making games before I was born. That is why this deep dive will be broken up into two parts. We will make our way to Beyond Good and Evil in this first video, and in part 2, we will look at the rest of his development history up to the new unreleased prequel, Beyond Good and Evil 2. Yves Guillemot, CEO and co-founder of Ubisoft, recently had an interview with IGN where they discussed some of Michel Ancel's history with Ubisoft. Check this out.
Yeah, when my brother met him, he was 17 years old, so he was not supposed to hire a guy of that age, but he was fascinated by Michel from the beginning.
It might sound pretty wild to us who live in the United States, but back then, they did their work in a castle.
We wanted all the external creators to work in one place, so we rented a castle in Brittany. Wow. And Michel came to the castle from time to time to work with the other teams there.
But the city life in Paris didn't really jive with Michel Ancel, so Ubisoft allowed him to establish a studio in Montpellier.
And Michel stayed in Paris for a while, but he thought living in a city was problematic for him, so he went in Montpellier, and we did continue to work with him, and that's how Rayman was created. A part in Montpellier, south of France, and a part in Paris.
And although Rayman was created in Montpellier, it was not the first game that Michel had worked on. We will have to go back to 1990 to take a look at the first game Ancel ever created, Brain Blasterz. Michel Ancel was the programmer and graphic artist for the video game Brain Blasterz. It was also known as The Teller. It was developed and published under Ubisoft, and it was released on the Amiga and Atari ST in 1990. Brain Blasterz was a memory puzzle game where you were trying to gather enough gold to finally speak with the legendary Wise Man. It was a simple memory game, but it was this early work of Michel Ancel that had impressed Yves Guillemot and his brother. Brain Blasterz was not the only game Michel Ancel worked on in 1990. He is also credited with working on the story of a game called Pick and Pile. Michel would continue to publish his titles through Ubisoft for the rest of his development history. This title was published on a lot of different machines. It was on the Amiga, the Commodore, Atari, and even Macintosh hardware. From what I can gather, there is not much to the story. This is just a Tetris-style puzzle game that grows in difficulty as the game goes on. Michel's next game comes out in 1995. Ancel created and established a new IP, as he is the one responsible for the concept and design of Rayman, originally released on the PlayStation 1. This was one of the first games that Ubisoft published on a large worldwide platform. Yves Guillemot tells us that it was partly due to struggles they were having with the Atari Jaguar at the time.
When the Jaguar was not coming fast to the market, and Sony came with the PS1.
Right.
And so we saw an opportunity to also port the game on PlayStation, and we developed it a lot on PlayStation and launched it worldwide, including Japan and the US, with the launch of the machine. And that was totally new for our first steps in creating studios.
Although the game was not the most successful in terms of sales, it is regarded by some as one of the best platforming games of the genre. The story consists of Rayman trying to retrieve the great Protoon from Mr. Dark, who has stolen this important relic, causing the world to spiral down into some of the most challenging 2D platforming levels of its time. Jamie O'Neill from Push Square recognizes that this was during the dawn of 3D graphics in gaming, which could have been one of the reasons for this game being overlooked by some. But its art style is vibrant and colorful, taking full advantage of the larger color palette provided by the new hardware. And the same could be said about the music. The next game Michel created is often overlooked because it is not a Rayman game. Tonic Trouble came out in 1999 on PC and the N64, and it was the first 3D game that Ubisoft had ever developed. Calcom has a nice review of the game, and he recognizes that this was Ubisoft's test run for developing games in 3D before they turned their attention back to Rayman. Tonic Trouble is obviously a game made by Michel Ancel with its wild and goofy storytelling. Here are 2 facts about the game you might be interested to know. This game featured the popcorn company Newman's Own as an in-game power-up. This popcorn was used as a mechanic that would make the main character super strong and able to reach new areas in the game. Ubisoft supported Newman's Own in part because they were a company that donated 100% of their after-tax profits to educational and charitable causes. Here's one more thing that you space monkeys will find interesting. The voice of the main character, Ed, is none other than David Gassman, who will later voice the character Paige in Beyond Good and Evil. Even though Tonic Trouble is a good game in its own right, it is often overshadowed by its successor released in the same year. Rayman 2: The Great Escape was also released in 1999. Michel Ancel had a large responsibility for this game, being credited with the concept, game design, artistic design, and story concept for the sequel of the original platformer back in 1995. This follow-up was originally released on the N64 and received an underwhelming reception. But consider the fact that this game was another 3D platformer among many that were being released around this same time. Yet the game has maintained a 90% score on Metacritic. Brendan Justin at IGN had nothing to say apart from praise for the game's graphics, gameplay, and sound. He even goes so far to say that it stops the competition. Another YouTuber also has nothing but good things to say about the game's tight mechanics, colorful locations, and engaging gameplay throughout this 12-hour experience. It's easy to see that this was another successful transition to 3D platforming for a game that had its origins as a 2D platformer. But Rayman had a long way to go before returning to its roots. After Rayman 2, Michel Ancel worked on the character design for another adaptation in the Rayman series. Rayman M was released on PC and PS2 in 2001. The M in the game title stands for multiplayer, but you'll also be able to find the game under the title Rayman Arena. This was a spin-off from the mainline games that heavily relied on the world and characters created in Rayman 2. It features 2 different game modes, a combat arena and racing, which can be played in single player against computer AI, but the focus here is on couch co-op. Sadly, this is the only Rayman game that is not available on Ubisoft's Uplay store on PC. This theme of a 4-player couch party game will show up again and again in the second half of Michel Ancel's development history. But at this point, Michel Ancel takes a crack at creating another new IP for Ubisoft. In 2003, Beyond Good and Evil is published as a multi-platform release. Ancel was the director for the project, focusing on game design and the game's story. I have whole videos and playlists dedicated to the original on the channel, so check those out if you want to know more. But in this discussion, we should recognize that this game was really something new for Ancel and the types of games he was making. This game breaks the platforming mold Michel was so familiar with as an action-adventure game with significant stealth mechanics. The game also incorporated vehicles into exploration along with racing and time challenges. While it was a departure in terms of game design, the art style of this game was unique and the music was great, which is consistent with what we have seen so far. The game shows its age, but many would agree that it's still a lot of fun to play once you get it working on modern systems. I find the story fascinating and it deals with some important themes. There are good reasons why this game has become a cult classic. Well, that's the end of part 1, so when we come back, we will look at the second half of Michel Ancel's development history. For now, was there anything that stood out to you? Any game you were surprised to see in Ancel's portfolio? Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video at all, and a dislike if you didn't. Thanks for watching, and be back for the next one if you want to see what game comes next in Michel Ancel's development history.